Well, for more on this situation in Libya, I'm now joined by Patrick Hayes, a reporter for the online magazine Spiked, joining us live from London. Mr. Hayes, now Libya's new government has revealed its new constitution. It's one that enshrines Sharia law as its foundation. Now, considering the experiences of Iraq and Afghanistan, just how democratic and corruption-free can such a state be?
Well, actually, if you look at the constitutional charter, I mean, yes, it does say at the start that it will, it will recognise as a state religion Islam and also implement Sharia law. But actually, in general, if you go through the constitution, it does actually make various claims saying it will safeguard freedom of expression, equal opportunities, and make sure that people who aren't Muslim will actually be fine and able to kind of pursue a prosperous life in Libya. That's not the aspect I'm so worried about with this, and I think there is some scaremongering about the fact that the Libyan government may fall into Sharia hands now, or the Muslim Brotherhood, which actually I think speaks to a kind of Western concern that if left to the Libyan people themselves to determine the kind of country that they want to govern, then it may fall into the hands of extreme Islamists. I don't think that's a realistic assessment of what's going to happen. But I mean, I think fundamentally, with the transitional government that's been put in place, what you have here is a government that's been cherry-picked by the West, far from being some kind of Muslim extremist group. It's instead a lot of ex-Gaddafi cronies and people that the West have judged suitable to act in this position. For the last few months, the Transitional Council have very much been oriented to trying to please Western leaders and get their support for governing Libya rather than the Libyan people. And I think a good start for democracy in Libya would be for them to try and gain legitimacy from the Libyan people instead.
Yeah, speaking about that, you're talking about a government put in place by NATO. I mean, the NTC says its concern now is securing the rest of the country. But I mean, with all the bad blood between the rebels and the loyalists, how can there possibly be peace, especially with growing reservations about what you have said, a government put into place by NATO?
Well, I think that is a problem, and I think as well as securing the rest of the country, they also need to try and win the debate with the Libyan people about why they're, in any way, more legitimate rulers than Gaddafi. These are people that aren't elected. They've been selected by NATO and by the West, as people that they're willing to work with and they're willing to be given embassies with. But the Libyan people still do not have a voice yet, and I think it's fundamental that as well as securing the rest of Libya, which of course they're trying to do at the moment, they do win that debate. They say, this is our constitutional charter, this is what we stand for, this is the way we think the country should be governed, and really put that to Libyan people for them to make up their own minds. But I mean, also fundamentally, in terms of securing the country, I think it's the absence of that you see from the transitional government, the absence of any real sense of what they're going to do next, other than just, basically implement the kind of blueprints that, the West seems happy with. This is going to cause real problems here. In some ways, actually, rather than securing the rest of the country, I think it's actually in the interests of the transitional government and probably NATO as well for Gaddafi to remain at large, because then they have a spectre that people can unite around. They can then say, right, we need to get Gaddafi, he's the number one threat, although a lot of the time they play that down. And I think in some ways they probably want him to continue to be at large and don't want him captured, because that's the one thing they can unite around.
Okay, and now let's talk about the fall of Tripoli. I mean, when Tripoli fell, almost all the Western leaders cheered that this is a job well done, Gaddafi has finally fallen. Yet just days later, now NATO promises to stay for as long as necessary. But why stay if the revolution is, well, over?
Well, for a start, I wouldn't say this is in any way a revolution. The Western governments basically bombing a path and kind of a ragbag of rebels then filling the vacuum that left by Gaddafi isn't in any way what I would term a revolution. But I mean, I think more fundamentally than that, there's been no sense from NATO or from Western leaders what they were doing in the first place. It was born out of an emotional reaction, a knee-jerk reaction to try and save lives in Benghazi, and they've not at any point had a coherent sense of what the mission is. And there's a lot of talk, a lot of grandstanding over the last few days about this is a job well done, there was no mission creep. Well, to the extent there was no mission creep going on, it was only because they didn't have any idea of what they were trying to achieve in the first place. And it's no surprise that now Gaddafi's gone, they're still hanging around because, they're still unsure, they're still unclear. They want to get some brownie points from this, and have made some short-term political gains as a result of it. But obviously what they don't want is a vacuum or a big kind of crisis to happen now, which means that they'll lose face and that, all of their kind of big tub thumping that, we've come in and saved the day falls flat, because there's been a lot of that in the last few days.
Okay, just very briefly, I do want to ask you, the UN was quite vocal in its promises to unfreeze international Libyan assets, but now we're learning that it may not be so simple. Now, banks are claiming that they don't know who to send the money to. They cite legal complications. Just how likely is it, you think, that the cash will reach Libya?
Well, I think, there will doubtless be technical and legal complications for years to come when it comes to the unfreezing of assets. This would be made much easier, I think, in many ways, especially making the moral and political grounds as to why the assets should be unfrozen, by a government which is actually kind of organically from the people rather than cherry-picked from the West. If the transitional government could actually say, we represent the Libyan people, genuinely represent their voices, rather than just basically coming in from another country, having been trained by the West to basically fulfil these functions, then I think they could have a much more legitimate moral and political claim. Although I do think there will always be legal technicalities and wranglings in these kind of situations, which could go on for many years.
All right. Thank you very much for your analysis there. Patrick Hayes, reporter for the online magazine Spiked. Thank you.